Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Barry Rellaford about his work with learning and development companies and inspiration as a skill. Barry Rellaford, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks, John.
Yeah, I'm excited to have a chance to chat. We have lots of connections professionally and educationally. Both of us are alumni of Brigham Young University in Provo, and I know you teach there currently. I've taught there in the past, and it's a great place and a great place to teach and to interact with students. So that's really wonderful. But you also bring so much rich experience, with you, and throughout your career, you've done so many wonderful things in relation to people development. So today we're going to be focusing on learning and development within companies and what you've experienced, and then looking at people development more generally. And this idea of inspiration as a skill, I know you do a good amount of thinking and talking about that. So I thought that would be a fun area to explore together today.
Sounds great.
As we get started, I wanted to share Barry's bio with all the listeners. Barry Rellaford has a gift of engaging leaders and teams in an understandable, engaging, and actionable way. He has worked with leaders and teams from over 120 countries. His clients include InfoTrax, Tulsa Tech, Stratford Schools, Kroger, Procter & Gamble, Verizon, Pfizer Consumer Health, and others. His vocation of awakening people to purposeful work began in his youth in Paradise, California, from high school, where he engaged the student body as varsity mascot. That's super cool, by the way. Through his undergraduate degree in human resource development at Brigham Young University, and onto his master's degree from Ohio State's business school. Barry continues to engage and enlighten everyone that he encounters. Barry is the founder of The Strength of 10, a consultancy focused on inspiring individuals and organizations to perform meaningful and sustainable work. He was a co-founder and master facilitator in Franklin Covey's Speed of Trust practice and co-authored the business parable, A Slice of Trust. Additionally, Barry is a Gallup certified strengths coach and facilitator of 3 Vital Questions. He serves on the board of the BYU Management Society and the LDS Publishing and Media Association. And I could go on and on and on about all of Barry's accomplishments and rich career history. Barry, before we jump into our discussion today, anything else you want to provide to the listeners and by way of background, personal context?
This is the kind of stuff, John, that your mom writes about you, so it's, I think it's just more of, I love people and have been fascinated with people most of my life. And so I like to help people grow, particularly in the workplace. So, all these things are really, milestones along a journey of trying to understand people and how to help people accomplish what we're here for. So that's, I suppose that's helpful.
Yeah, well said. And that's, we share a lot in that regard. I feel like kind of my life's purpose is to better understand people and to help people better understand each other, whether that's within a family setting, an organizational setting, or what have you. And, a lot of what we do, a lot of what we teach, a lot of what we research, a lot of what we do in our consultancies is not rocket science. It comes back to kind of foundational principles
Hmm.
and just being consistent and working on developing meaningful, sustainable relationships with people, whether that be
Hmm.
with a spouse, with a kid, with a neighbor, with a boss, with coworkers in the workplace. It's about the human connection that we make with people, and then finding ways to leverage the best out of each other to support each other and to maximize our capacity, right? And within organizations, there's a business case to be made for that, because when you maximize the potential of your people, you're going to be more productive, and you're going to lower costs, and you're going to increase innovation, and all of that, and that helps the business be successful. But there's the human element too. It's just about having meaning and purpose in what we do,
Hmm.
and driving and pulling out motivation from doing that kind of work. I mean, that's what drives people to do their best work.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, if anything, I think about it as a calling. I mean, the work calls to us, and there are things we're passionate about. We have gifts that we want to give away that bring us joy to give those to people. And so the workplace is one of those arenas or areas of our lives where that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm curious. You've had a rich history doing work with lots of different clients, lots of different companies. Perhaps any particular examples of places where you've worked when you've been in the people management type of roles, or learning and development types of roles. Anything you'd like to share with us?
At one point in my career, helped run a company where we were when I joined them, they'd come out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy here in the US, which allows you to reorganize your debts to keep operating. And so I joke about I worked for a nonprofit. It wasn't supposed to be, but we weren't making money at the time, but we were able to operate, and then got profitable. We were a publicly traded company, and I led a function through the bankruptcy. They had actually shut down their human resources function. And I had just graduated with my master's degree and had worked in a great HR department at CompuServe. And so it wasn't a greenfield situation where we were really starting, but it was kind of a, hey, how do we got some opportunities here. And the term human resources was not very trusted, I guess, best way to put it, in the environment. So we were looking for a name, and I was talking to the CEO, the founder, and I said, I'm not sure if HR is the best, I'd spent some time getting to know people, and I said, I'm not sure HR is the best thing to call. He says, what do you want to call it? And I said, what would you think about organizational development? And he said, boy, it's kind of long. I said, yep, looking for the biggest title I can get. But but as we talked about it, it really became, and my HR friends, and we were doing HR. It wasn't like we were trying to mask or hide anything, but actually more my OD friends were saying, hold it, Barry, it sounds like you're doing HR stuff. Why do you call it organizational development? And I said, besides getting a long title, I said, it's really about what we do every day is we help organize and develop. So we help to bring order to what's a challenging, chaotic environment at times. And we help people within it grow. So our mission was very much about creating a place where great people choose to work. And each of those words was precisely chosen. And as we looked at it, it was, and I'd say to my OD friends, it's not just about doing surveys or group work. Yeah, we do that. But if you get to choose how you position your brand, your employment brand in the market, if you get to engage people as trusted partners and not just as hired hands, who gets selected, how they get onboarded, how they get compensated, how they get performance managed, how they get developed, how they leave the organization. If you get to influence all of that, that's really great work. And so that was my last kind of corporate job that I had like that. But it was it was a really great developmental experience. And those 7 years I spent at Meditech were very much kind of like a PhD in business.
Well, very nice. And I agree with you. I think, I really bring an OD change management kind of training, development kind of a lens to HR. So, I teach a lot of different functional HR types of classes, and I do that kind of consulting work too. But to me, it always comes back to kind of these bigger picture questions. So even if you're doing something really technical, about the onboarding process, or you're doing something technical about the performance management process or whatever, it's still about OD. It's still about leveraging the people and creating the culture and creating the overall healthy work environment where people can do their best. Whether that, and that starts from the very beginning of designing the work, that then goes into how you recruit applicants and screen applicants and hire applicants and onboard them and train them, and it feeds into everything that HR does, in my opinion. And I do believe that's how HR has shifted over time to have more of that kind of a strategic type of perspective to all of these more technical aspects. But you still find leaders, HR leaders, HR workers within organizations who kind of have the old school mentality as it relates to HR. And I think that's unfortunate because then you miss out and you lose out on the potential in terms of what good HR, good OD can do for you.
Well, one of the things, John, that underlies this is one's view or beliefs about who are humans. What is it to be a person? And that sounds very philosophical, but as you know, teaching ethics, one of the things we talk about is philosophy. And you gotta, as a leader, as a just a servant leader, as somebody who's trying to make a difference in the world, you got to get philosophy. You got to think about, well, what do I believe? And when it comes to human resources or growing people, you got to think, well, what do I think people are? What do I think it is to be human? And one of my influential professors at BYU was Terry Warner. Terry's done a lot of work that now has become the Arbinger Institute, so leadership and self-perception.
One of the most influential books I ever read as an undergrad student was Terry Warner's The Bonds That Make Us Free.
Yes, that's still one of my most powerful books. I was taking a class I had taken Stephen Covey's last class when he was still teaching on campus, and that was great. And he was actually on the board of a company I worked at. And one Saturday morning, I was a manager in this company, and we're up at Sundance, not far from here in Utah, or in Utah Valley. And I went to hear this professor, Terry Warner, speak. Stephen Covey shows up, and he's ready to take notes. I thought, I knew Dr. Covey was a really good student, but Terry Warner came in and blew me away. So it's like, wow. And part of what Terry's work that's influenced me over the years, and I continue to come back to and think a lot about, is it goes back to this idea is, who are we? What is it to be a person? And we can see people, and this goes into the work of Martin Buber and other philosophers, but it gets into, do we see each other? I call it open and closed. Terry talks about in the box, out of the box. But if I'm closed to the humanity of another, or if I'm doing HR from this perspective, I tend to look at people as human resource units, which one company I knew of, actually, they didn't have FTEs, full-time equivalents. They had HRUs. How many human resource units do we have? It's like, wow, because it shows the belief behind it. And do we see people as things, as projects, as objects? It's like my computer. When it doesn't work, I get frustrated. It's a machine. But we see people that way, as things, versus seeing people, and I call it the closed perspective versus an open perspective, which is open to their humanity. Are we open to people have talents and gifts and passion and mission and gift and, calling. They have weaknesses. We all do. We're foolish. We can be prejudiced, biased, weak, emotional, irrational, and yet so wonderful. And so when I think about human resources and org design and all that, is we really have to think about and talk about, for whom are we designing this? Because if we're not careful, we're designing it for more of a control paradigm that says, well, these are things to be controlled versus people to be grown. And it's not that we do it to them, we create the conditions in which people can flourish.
Yeah. And when you have that kind of an approach towards people within organizations, people as things to be controlled, to be manipulated, to be, whatever, then it leads to exploitation, right?
It can, absolutely.
And whether that's the intention or not. And that's, most people don't have that intention. Most people don't go to work thinking, I'm going to figure out the best way to exploit my people today, But when we have that mindset, it just naturally happens, because you just start to treat the people, just like you treat a piece of equipment or whatever, and you start to see them as replaceable, easily replaceable. And the problem with that is that we know there's so much research that shows, there's metrics around we have KPIs, and we have the various metrics to understand how people are performing and the cost of an employee and all of that. But there's so much intangible that comes from people within an organization that's really hard, if not impossible, to measure, but it's easy to see when it's flourishing. And it's that dynamic that happens, the synergies that happen as you have dynamic teams working together to drive solutions, to innovate, to enhance, quality and productivity measures, whatever. And that's what we're looking for. And if we're just treating people as things, we're not going to get there, because people aren't going to feel valued. They're not going to feel invested in. They're not going to feel seen and heard. And they're when that happens, people kind of tend to do the minimum. They tend to try to play it safe and not make waves and just kind of get by rather than doing their best work. And that's not to the benefit of them or the organization.
Absolutely agree, John. And it's the thing where, again, we can be imprisoned by our beliefs and our language, not to be snarky or anything, but even the term human resources equates people with financial or information or capital resources. And even when we say human capital, again, I know it's an HCI broadcast, and I think that's one of the things we're searching for in our culture, is trying to figure out how do we believe better? Because we don't want to be seen that way ourselves. And I agree with you. I don't think most leaders I've worked with are really good human beings, but it doesn't mean we don't do stuff that we are unaware of and are unintentionally. And it doesn't mean we don't bring about harm. And we're seeing, and when people don't feel like they've got a voice or choice, we will resist, and we will do it in every way we can. And I think we're seeing that in our American society today and across the globe. So people are saying, I do not want to be diminished. And I don't want to be diminished either. And it's how do we create bigger conversations? Reminds me of this, it's not great poetry, but it's Edwin Markham who said, he drew a circle that left me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win, and we drew a circle that brought him in. And as cutesy as that may sound or trite, I think about this bigger circle that we need to do. And I believe in this profession that we're in. It used to be one where you go for your career to die into personnel, or you can't make it in a P&L role, so we'll stick you into the HR thing. You can't do too much damage there. I think it's transformed, and it's more than just a seat at the table that we're looking for as HR professionals, but really saying we need to create different conversations. We need to create different organizations, different relationships, as you mentioned earlier, John, are critical. That this connective tissue that we have that needs to expand. It's a more complicated world, and we need better responses to that.
Well, that's for sure. It's complicated. We have an increasingly interconnected, globalized economy. We need to have much more, stronger intercultural, cross-national competencies. Everything's just more complicated. Everything's more messy and more nuanced than it's probably ever been.
And isn't that awesome? I'm sorry to interrupt you, John, but there's this great quote by George Land who said, growth is making increasingly complex connections.
Yeah,
I love that. That stuck with me. And I agree with that. The complexity is actually a really good thing because it allows us to get greater growth. But boy, we got to be smart and wise and truly loving through all this.
Yeah, well, exactly. The growth comes from the tension, right?
Mm-hmm.
Growth comes within that realm of complexity and ambiguity and nuance in that wrestle. That's where we find out more about ourselves and each other. That's where we see what we're made of. That's where we learn, we make more of those connections, and most innovations happen within that kind of a space, right? Mm-hmm. It's when we have those organic opportunities to connect, and whether it's us individually making mental connections between different things that have never been connected before, or people connecting that have never been connected before. That's where the good stuff happens. And so, yeah, we don't need to see the complexity, from a lens of fear. We see it from a lens of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So John,
Absolutely.
what drew you to this field? What brought you to the field of people development?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to bore people too much, but I wrestled, as an undergrad with what I wanted to do, and I switched majors 4 times, and
Awesome.
and I was an accountant actually. I was
Mm.
an accounting major at BYU. Great accounting program,
Hmm.
and I was good at it. And I figured, hey, it's a good program, and I'll have a stable career, and whatever. And then I'd served an LDS mission in South Korea, so I
Mm.
was minoring in Korean. And one day my Korean professor walks in the room, and he's like, "Hey, who wants to go back to Korea for an internship over the summer?" And I didn't even know what it was going to. Yeah, I
Mm.
didn't even know what it was going to be, but I just raised my hand. I'm like, that would
Yeah.
be awesome. I wasn't married yet. I did marry young, but I wasn't married yet, and I decided this would be awesome. So I went back, and they just put me complete, like it was complete chance, right, or luck or blessing or whatever. But I ended up in the corporate organizational development office for LG
Oh,
Electronics
wow.
in South Korea. And that's all it took, like a
Hmm.
summer of that. And I'm like, I don't want to do accounting. So I came back, to BYU, and I was in the Marriott School, but I went and started talking to some of the OB
Hmm.
professors and HR professors. David Charrington was a mentor of
Hmm.
mine. And at the time, they didn't actually have an HR undergrad
Hmm.
program or an anything related to that specifically.
Right.
And so they just said, go do social science. So
Mm.
that's what I did. I minored in business. I switched out of accounting. I switched to sociology
Mm.
actually, and then I ended up doing focusing on HR in my master's program, and then I went back to sociology for my PhD. So I mean, really, I always had this sense that I like to teach. I like to work with people. I have a very analytical mind, but I like to find ways to translate that over into helping people be more effective. I come from a family of social workers and
Mm.
educators, and so I kind of took a slightly different route, but
Hmm.
it's a lot the same also. And it's just applied in an organizational setting. And so that's really what drew me in, and then the more I got into it, the more I just was fascinated with it. So my real connection with HR originally was organizational development,
Hmm.
training and development. I worked for a couple of years in the human resource development office at BYU,
Hmm.
while I was going through my master's program. And yeah, that sold me. And so at that
Wow.
point, I was doing consulting work. I'd worked as internal and external consultant with various organizations. I thought that's what I was going to do full time, but then I decided to go on for a PhD and go the professorial route. But it's been a passion of mine ever since.
Thanks for sharing that, John. That's really inspiring. And it actually, it just gets me thinking about what you mentioned about this inspiration skill. Um, I believe everybody there's this, I don't know, we call it hidden, maybe neglected capacity well, let me back up. I believe we're running through our bodies right now are radio waves, uh, telephone signals, the internet, all this. I worked in telecommunications, so I kind of understand how some of this stuff works. We got all these waves passing right through our bodies. We're not aware of them. And unless you have a device that can pick them up, telephone or, computer, etc., they just pass through and we're totally unaware of them. And I believe there's this other, and it's metaphorical, but there's something I call the light stream that flowing through society, and you can call it the collective unconscious. People will attribute it to spiritual means and say it's God or the Holy Ghost or some other. And I don't really explore with people so much what the source is as much as to acknowledge that there's something there. And I've studied quite a bit of innovation and look at how did, in a lot of medical, there's a really interesting book called it's called Happy Accidents, and it's about medical developments and innovation. And it's on one hand kind of scary to think, oh, all these things like penicillin and others were just accidental. And yet on another hand, I don't believe they are. I really believe there's this, and I've studied poetry and music and all kinds of discoveries. What you find is it's not just this flash of inspiration. There's often years of thinking and cultivation to where, as I look at it as a skill, as saying, if we grant that there's something like that there, when, like for you, that you happen to be in a place where this professor says, hey, who wants to go to South Korea? And you're going like, hey, I'd do that. And you'd already been there. Probably spoke the language well. I mean, all that. And then you just happen to end up in LG, and it takes your career in a whole different direction than what you'd planned. To me, there's 4 steps I often work with people, is saying the first one is to get open. It's how do you get receptive so that when an opportunity occurs, you can kind of recognize it. And that can take years sometimes to, for it to develop and to recognize it. But like you, as I listen to your career, just it developing it to where you're saying, hey, I thought I'd go this route, and then this came along and I decided to do this. And this has been a good answer. And there's lots of ways to get open. But the thing that I'm hearing in you, there's that receptivity. The second thing is to capture when these thoughts or feelings come to us. And they're not just any thoughts, I think of them as, they tend to be uplifting and they tend to be others-centered. It's that, where can we use these gifts? How can we be of benefit to others, be helpful? And I believe what calls a lot of people into human resources is that kind of desire, is that, yes, there can be the interesting complexities of compensation plans or design, succession planning. There's certainly analytical space. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, we only just care about people. But it's noting those things. And so I've journaled for about 45 years now, started in high school. And that for me has been a good practice. I don't journal every day, and I use all kinds of stuff. I write on paper, I'll write on my computer. I use my phone, record things, but it's just a way of being able to capture these ideas and thoughts and feelings as they come to me. The third step I find is around distilling. So I'll go back and review things and kind of look at what's kind of happening there, and even kind of ask out loud, is there more? What else is happening here? And many times there's a fourth step that's, what action, if any, can I take on this? And sometimes feel almost compelled. It's a thing where you start with, open and boom, go right to act. It's like, I need to do this. I can't have peace until I act on this or do whatever it is. And a metaphor we might think about is photography, and whether it's digital or film, is that, you got to open up the lens but you notice something. It's like appreciative inquiry. It's the appreciative eye. What is it you're seeing? But then you got to capture the image somehow, and then develop it or distill it. And sometimes we'll alter it and to improve it, whether we're using software, whatever we might do is to improve what we think that is. But then you got to publish, you got to act on it for others to enjoy and see it or be inspired. So sorry, I got off a bit on this inspiration skill, but I hope that's helpful to your listeners today, is to heed and to act on those things as they come to us.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I think we need to quiet our minds. We need to open ourselves up. I like the camera metaphor. We need to open the aperture of our mind and our vision, right? To be able to take advantage of all the different opportunities that are put before us. And I've had what I would call flashes of inspiration in the past, but I've also had what I would call the slow burn of inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you work on things over time. And I would say, some of the most meaningful things that have happened in my life have been, a decade or more in the making, and just that slow consistency can reap really great benefits. And so I think, as we talk about inspiration as skill, it's also mindfulness, right? As a skill. So it's practicing mindfulness, being present in the moment, being present with the people you're interacting with when you're there with them. I think all of that leads to our ability to have that kind of inspiration, regardless of what one's personal religious beliefs may be, or metaphysical kind of framings, or whatever it is. I think we can tap into that opportunity to quiet our minds and connect, and that human connection is where the magic happens. And so I hope people can look for ways to have those opportunities in their life.
Yeah, you use a great word here. It's the word mind. And I lived in France, and the word in French for mind is esprit, or, this was a clothing brand for a while, but it also means spirit. And it's kind of interesting. Mind, we often think about our brain, but brain's this organ up inside our skulls, but the mind is more than, I think, just how we process thoughts. In fact, a lot of neuroscience is saying that we don't just process information up in between our ears, but there's a neural net throughout our whole body, and that we do process things. We'll feel it in our gut, but we're actually processing because our nervous system is a network. And being able to, again, people have lots of different beliefs around spirit or this essence of people that's more than physical. And being able to tune that in and to be mindful or spiritful in a sense. And as I look at the great companies I've worked with, the great leaders I've associated with, there is a spirit, there's an ambiance, there's a kind of ineffable essence about them and the culture. Culture is really hard to define, and a simple definition I like a lot is it's what we do together. And you mentioned social work. My mom was a social worker as well, and it was years later after I'd been in HR inside of companies that it kind of struck me. It's like, I'm doing the same work my mom does, only I'm doing this corporate thing. I'm doing corporate social work, HR. And I thought it was kind of funny at first, but it's like my intent and hers were very similar. So you want to help people in the world and to have a better lives and fulfill their potential. And that was kind of a cool connection. So it sounds like you've got some of that in your background as well, John.
Yep, I do. Well, Barry, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today. I think these are all topics that we should always try to think about and explore, self-reflect on. You mentioned journaling. I think that's a really just simple practice, a simple habit to that can reap a lot of benefits as we journal, as we critically self-reflect on what we're dealing with and the opportunities that we're given, that can really pay dividends down the road. I hope as we move forward that listeners can consider, what we talked about in terms of inspiration as a skill and the value of the innate human value of the people around us, whether it's within organizations, whether it's within our home, in our neighborhoods, whatever. And hopefully we can find ways as organizational leaders to better support those that we work with, to be a servant leader like you referred to earlier, and ultimately help people fulfill their potential. I think that's what it's all about. Before we close today, Barry, I want to give you the last word, and please share with the listeners how they can get connected with you and find out more about what you do.
Great. Well, thank you, John. I really appreciate your listening. There's a Jewish rabbinical phrase that there are ears that open mouths. I think of that as that true listening invites true speaking. So I feel honored that you want to visit with me today, and I hope something I've shared has been of value to people. As a coach, one of the things I find is that we already have access to the wisdom we need to govern our lives and our work very effectively. And I think this inspiration skill helps us access that. And too many times we keep searching for something when we really have a lot of these answers already. And like you say, it's to be mindful and quiet ourselves and to just be with it and and be open, and not closed. Because when we close ourselves off to others, we also close ourselves off from our true selves. Because to be human is to be in relationship, healthy, trusting relationships. So best way to contact me is just my name, Barry, Barry, Rellaford, Rellaford, Barry Rellaford at mac.com, MAC. Is just people send me an email, and I'd love to visit and see if there's anything I can share that'd be useful. I am working on a book on inspiration as a skill. It may not be the title, but I'm making some good progress on it, but hope to publish that either late this year or early next year. But we're glad to visit, see if there's anything I can do that would be helpful to others.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barry. It's been a real pleasure talking with you today. I hope listeners will reach out to Barry, find out more, about what he's doing, get connected on LinkedIn, and check out the work that he's doing. I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that everyone can continue to find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
We are excited to announce the launch of Human Capital Innovation's new e-magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We will be publishing issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. We hope you'll check out our first issue, and please let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.